Hello, everybody, and welcome to this lunchtime session. I am absolutely delighted to be hosting this one. And before we get into the details of the session, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about ourselves and what's coming up in the community. And these events are always a fantastic opportunity to network and connect. So for those of you that are here on time, well done. Thank you very much. Can you introduce yourselves in the chat? Say who you are, what you do, and where you work, because it's always fantastic to see who's here and to connect with each other as well. Make the most of that opportunity. And any thoughts or comments you have, do share them with us in the chat. But there's also going to be a Q&A. So if you've got any questions for our speaker today, do put them in the Q&A and upvote the ones you're interested in, because if we run out of time, those are the ones that are going to get asked first. So brief introduction from me. So I'm Jo Stanford. I head up the Healthcare Project and Change Association. We're a community interest company supporting the development of project and change capability across the healthcare sector in the UK. We work really collaboratively with other not-for-profit organisations, so things like the finance, procurement, digital and data professions, as well as the clinical professions in healthcare. We are UK-wide, and I'm delighted to say we've recently had our first Wales network meeting. And so we've got groups in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, as well as in the different regions in England. If you aren't already registered for one of those communities, please do. It's a great opportunity to meet peers in your own area and to share ideas and insights. Always saving time and effort by sharing what you know with others and learning from each other. We also support the professional development, so looking at workforce development, career development, things to support those within the profession, but also supporting the wider workforce as well, because everybody gets involved in projects and change, whether they are SROs, exec sponsors, that you are stakeholders, or you're operations people who are implementing changes. It's really important that everybody has a core understanding of project and change management, and we're doing our best to spread that message. It's free for everybody to be part of the community. We are a community interest company, and community is at the heart of what we do. So if you're interested in projects and change and learning more, do subscribe and you'll get access to loads of resources and insights, as well as all the events that are coming up. The ones we have are coming up next. We've got a fantastic session with Bryn Hodgkiss around storytelling for the community on the 15th of July. We have one around driving efficiency and without compromising care, which we know is a bit of a challenge at the moment. So with Transparent Choice, who look at portfolio prioritisation. We also have another community event on storytelling, so turning people into their own superheroes. And when everybody's feeling a little bit under the cosh at the moment, that's a good thing to make yourselves feel good about who you are and what you can do. We have a series of joint events with the Federation for Informatics Professionals. So that's the digital data and clinical informaticians group. And the third of the three events is going to be on change management for digital transformation, one of the key government priorities from hospital to community. So do come along and find out more about that. And then we have a service merger insight from the fantastic Jules Houle, who is developing a joint non-surgical oncology service between two trusts, and how you manage the change side of that and get people to go on that journey with you. These are all free for everybody to attend. Do just sign up to them. The link will be in the chat. Come along. Even if you can't attend, you will always get the link to the recording. We also have some network events coming up, and the next one is tomorrow, and that's the Northwest, 11th of July in London, and then 3rd of September, East of England. We'll have a bit of a break over the summer. You can go to any if you'd like to. There's no holding you back from joining any regional event, but do sign up for them because that's really valuable. As an organisation, we support through membership, but we also support through training and development, which I think is really critical in order to keep the skills up for keeping the sector at its best, to be able to adapt to all the changes and keep it going for future generations. So do come along and have a look at the things on the website. We've got a lot of resources around change management and supporting change delivery, and also the role of the SRO, which is a really critical one. And often these are people who have had no real exposure to training in this space. So to be a great SRO, we've got some really great insights, resources and training. Organisational membership is is all about supporting the organisation to implement support to the workforce. And I know everybody's going through organisational change at the moment, but the smart ones are going to be thinking about what it looks like on the other side. And the other side has to be, how do we support the workforce better with training and development, upskilling, but also organisational maturity. It's going to take focus to get that up and running quickly once the dust has settled from all the changes. So if you're in a space to have a think about that and responsible for that within your organisation, do come and have a chat with us about how that can support your organisational maturity and capability. Okay, so that was it from me, just a quick update. And I want to introduce today's speaker. It's a fantastic opportunity, and I'm absolutely delighted that we've got Nick Petschek here from Kotter Inc. For those of you that work in the change management space, John Kotter will be incredibly well known to you. He is one of the founding fathers of the change management movement and has done so much of the initial thinking, development, methodologies that support globally with change management today, and always good to find out what's happening in that space. And Nick and I met because I was interested in keeping up with what's happening, and also for my own development and for us to support the community with that. And we got to talking about how this would be a really valuable time to share this particular insight from Kotter Inc., which is leading through uncertainty. And if ever now is the right time, it's absolutely now, isn't it? So great to have you with us today. Do post your questions in the chat if you want to make any comments or thoughts, and then put them in the Q&A. And again, if I can just say, delighted to have you with us today, Nick, and thank you for coming, and over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite. And I've been tracking people's kind of location and roles in the chat already. It's a great group of 100+ folks that are joining us on the lunch break, and even just thinking about what you had just said in terms of opportunities for folks moving forward, being your own superhero, neuroscience for change. I saw, so I'll talk about that in a little bit to our version of it. So I do see a lot of parallels and complementary portions of this, which is really great. Let me bring my slides up. And I'm going to start with just making sure we're setting the stage in terms of what I'll talk about for the next half hour or so. I want to do four things with us today. First is, what are we seeing from Kotter International? What is today's world? Joe, you mentioned now, if not when, around uncertainty. So we'll go into a little bit of that. Heads up, there's going to be a QR code for that bit. So if you've already got your phone handy, that's great. Then I want to do a small teaser around Kotter International. Like you said, Joe, many people know John Kotter, the name and the researcher. So I'll give you a bit of a history lesson on who we are and some of actually the mistakes that we made early on in research, or at least things that used to be relevant and are no longer relevant, to help dispel some of those myths. And the two pieces that I'm looking forward to is giving you some tools of how you can lead yourself and others, especially in this kind of changing environment that we're in. And then lastly, I'll end with our latest research, which we're ideally publishing end of this year, maybe beginning next year, in our book around adaptable organizations. So with that, to your point around storytelling, I also like to start with an image, right? So it can be very powerful in terms of getting an emotional reaction from people. So I'll let you take this in for a second. Now, personally, I am not a climatologist, but what I see here is uncertainty. There's definitely a storm, there's definitely energy, and there's definitely power, but I don't know right now if it's coming, if it's going, if it's moving towards me, away from me. And that's how I at least interpret a lot of the signals in the market right now, and the conversations that I'm having with clients and folks like you is, what happens next? We truly don't think that we know. So here's the question for all of us with a QR code. Which world event, starting since 2000, caused the biggest spike in uncertainty? And I've given you 4 options. You should be able to use the camera on your phone to get that in there. If for some reason, thank you, Helen, you've got that in there. So it's at least working for a couple of folks. This to us is one of those moments of what do we think back to as reference points for where the biggest inflection point socially has been in the last 25 years. And this is usually what we see. We usually see COVID-19 is locked in people's minds. I think it also is very industry specific, of course, with a healthcare group that would make a lot of sense. Let's give this as the general curve. You can keep voting, but I want to put you into some actual data from, here we go, from the World Economic Policy Index. So this is an index that's been tracked since, I believe, around the 80s. And what you can do is you can go back and you can see where uncertainty has been spiking in different parts of the world and in different industries. So for us, this is the global view. So we had 9/11, right? That's the first kind of major spike coming out of the 2000s that we had all kind of had a couple of votes on. Financial crisis, that's kind of maybe security focused. Financial crisis was the beginning of us starting to realize that our current collective worldview in terms of how we finance and create markets wasn't as stable as we had thought, right? I was in the US at that point. I'm American by birth, living in Barcelona now for goodness, 7 or 8 years at this point. So I think coming from the US, some of the main banking centers, that was a big shock to our kind of psyche and understanding of how we viewed how stable our society was. It gets better. A couple years of more or less gradual climbs until COVID-19 hits. So this is, again, a kind of a transformation in terms of how work happens, our understanding of boundaries and geopolitical collaboration. I think there's some great books out there, Moonshot being one of them, around how Pfizer and other companies came to the kind of forefront of, and Moderna, of kind of creating in 9 months the first vaccine. And obviously, folks like you who are on the front line would have felt that most acutely. However, this is still not the biggest spike that we've had in the last 25 years. This is as of May 2025. I didn't update the slide because the data isn't official yet, but it's even higher for June, right? So if you think about the last 6 months and you especially look at that huge spike from kind of beginning of 2025 to where we are now, this is uncharted territory. This is a storm that we don't know how to navigate. We don't know if it's coming. We don't know if it's arriving. So for us at Kotter, this is the biggest moment for our tagline and the reason that John started this work, which is more leadership from more people. So this is just a smattering of kind of emphasizing the point of getting used to the chaos and uncertainty, and then how to reduce stress becomes one of the top searches in Google right now. So it's very much around superpowers. How do we actually elevate ourselves and feel good about what we're doing, as well as using the neuroscience and the kind of research that we've learned around change and transformation to get us through and weather this storm. I do though want to take that as a cliffhanger moment from uncertainty exists. We know it's all around us. This is why we were formed several years ago. And I want to bring you a little bit through John's original research and how that's been updated, because I think that can help you in your day-to-day change projects and transformation work. So John started in the early 70s with this original idea. I won't go through the whole slide, but you essentially get a sense of a lone practitioner, right, in Harvard Business School saying, I think there's something different around how we should be leading organizations. And he stumbled across this idea that it was about leadership as opposed to management. So while it was a mainly engineering focused drive in terms of how people led, he went to a how can we lead through heart and people and building something for all of us. So that's kind of morphed over the last couple of years into building an R&D leadership team. So there's 4 of us now at this point. You're welcome to connect with me for any follow-ups if we don't get to Q&A here. And working with John, one of the things that becomes so exciting is he is an academic at heart, just like I think a lot of industries like healthcare. Folks are in it for the passion and the impact that they can have. So ideally, once we get to some of the content that can be helpful, you can literally reach out to him, you can reach out to any of us, and we will try to point you into the right direction. So if you think back to 72, this is when John started his original idea. One of the key places where you've probably first heard about John Kotter is through the 1996 book, Leading Change. And that is our 8-step model, which is now incredibly defunct, yet people continue to use it, right? So what was happening around that time is people were reading the book, implementing it 1 through 8, and realizing that it actually wasn't working. And there was 2 things that weren't working. One is they were using it as a blueprint as opposed to a guide. And the two is we had written it just before the Agile revolution, right? So if you think about the Agile manifesto in the early 2000s, that's revolutionized how we actually approached projects. So instead of going from a waterfall, we went to Agile methodology. We updated that in mid 2014s. So we've started to work at this as accelerators as opposed to steps. So this is a key difference. Instead of steps, it's accelerators. So anytime someone says, here's our step process to achieving change or transformation, automatically in our minds, they're thinking of a time that no longer exists, right? So you have to be thinking about, how do I iterate on this? How do I learn? How do I adapt? And how do I use that kind of cutting edge research? This was also our moment where we started to develop a model called the dual operating model, especially for the NHS and large federated systems. One of the kind of pitfalls to larger organizations is usually relying on hierarchy and control, as opposed to the agility of networks and social connections. So for example, there's places like this that we see in organizations being the forefront and the leaders of change. So whether that's, in our words, a guiding coalition or a network of change agents or ambassadors of change, however you brand it, it's the folks that are most passionate about the work they're doing that can really move the needle on change and transformation. Lastly, and this will get us back into content, survive, thrive for us is our view of the neuroscience research over the last 20 or 30 years in terms of how individually we respond to change. So one thing that we've also evolved our research to is not just around organizations, it's around leaders as individuals. So I'll give you a couple of techniques that you can start to implement in terms of how can you start leading through change in a way that mitigates survive and activates thrive. Survive being the quick, clear focus on a goal, but leads to burnout, hence the Google search of reducing stress. Thrive being the opportunity seeking, the passion, the creativity, and the excitement. Generally, beyond research, there's two things that we also do: advisory and consulting. So we've worked with the NHS actually in a couple of capacities and in healthcare systems in the US. And then training and education is a big component of what we've done since COVID, because that was where we started to realize this is the way that we can get more of our impact out to the world through a virtual manner. And what I've done that we'll get to in a moment, and I see actually a lot of really interesting new comments coming in, which is great. So we have a change certification program. There's 6 courses. What I've done for what we'll do in a second is I've picked a couple of different components or modules from these. So this will give you at least a taste of what this could look like. And there's more information, either if you want to take an actual course or even just free downloads to dive into it more after this. So that brings us back to how then do you actually put some of this into practice, and what can it look like in this moment of uncertainty? So the first one to point out is around the neuroscience. So there's 2 ways that we as individuals respond to change. The first is what's hardwired into us. This is the fight or flight, and we're intrinsically hardwired to fear certain changes. At some point, that was actual physical survival. At this point, it's mainly anxiety at looking at an email or opening your inbox in the morning. For folks on front lines or doing work with patients, it can be patient related. But truly, there's a hardwiring inside of us. There's a phrase of neurons that fire together, wire together. So we have a default system essentially built into us to fear what is going to change. Yet, researchers have also found that there's places and ways that somehow unlock that creates creativity and excitement and passion. And for us, the most important thing is, how do you understand that the hardwiring is just a default? It's not set in stone, right? So it's actually changeable, and there's actually things and tools that you can use to start to undo that hardwiring and start to rewire for this current state of uncertainty. And for us, it's the inability then to adapt in those moments that creates that uncertainty. So it's actually the lack of flexibility or lack of adaptability that creates the survive moments for us, because it's a innate desire for us to want to have an impact and to follow our passions. And so when we can't do that, we feel a lack of agency is when survive starts coming up. And so what we've boiled this down to is 4 key activities that people or leaders should be doing, and unfortunately most oftenly are not doing in their day-to-day situations. So first is taking stock. And it seems simple, but if you think about the last couple of conversations I've had with leadership teams, the first question we've had for them is, what does the first 20 minutes of your day look like? And typically it is all reactive. It's all, I'm still in bed and I've already checked my email and I'm starting to answer urgent questions, or what I think are as urgent questions, so that when I sit down on my desk, I've got a clear inbox. Or it's having a pre-thoughtful conversation with your boss to figure out how you're going to react to their demands for the day. The first and most important thing that we've learned in terms of reducing survive and activating thrive is truly taking stock of how do you want to use your time and what types of activities are going to get you excited, put you into thrive, versus reactive or put you into survive. So it's that first 20 minutes that really, there's a variety of books in terms of whether it's time management, energy management, emotional management, around how do you create the space to take stock into what impacts you. The second most important one is, once you've taken stock of how you want to spend your time and what puts you into each of those different channels, how do you really intentionally start to activate thrive? So especially in organizations where we might not have complete agency over how we spend our day, how do I actually use the quick moments or small moments or interactions with other human beings that give me the energy that can activate the passion and excitement that I have? The last two, or rather the third maybe, is an interesting one for us, because it's around so we start to define the walls and boundaries around our personal operating system. So for example, 21 minutes ago, I shut off Teams notifications because I was getting a notification every time someone was putting something in the chat. Really helpful if I'm getting 1 or 2 of those, not helpful if we're getting hundreds at a time, right? So there's ways that we can start to understand what's the noise in my personal system that I can start to wall off, or at least kind of bulk deal with, as opposed to having a constant barrage of information. The last one is around celebrating success and progress. So if you go back to some of our 8-step model or accelerators model, quick wins is one of the key ways to build momentum in an organization. And for us, even on a daily basis or a weekly basis, as you're managing yourself, this is the key to staying positive and staying excited about what you're doing. Is actually at the end of the day, using a day as an example, but it could be a week or it could be a project. At the end of that time period, really assessing, what have I actually achieved? What was I setting out to do? What have I ended up doing? And usually you've made much more progress than you think. There's a variety of tools out there. Daniel Pink has a great book called When that talks through a lot of these kind of like tactical ways that you can do that, to really be seeing the progress that you're making day in and day out, or through projects to projects. I wanted to take a second here to see if actually a question that to start in the chat for taking stock. What have you all done that you can share with some of your colleagues, with the other 100 or so folks on the call, that might be helpful for them? I'll keep going in the presentation, but it would be great to just get a couple of ideas out there, things that we've seen work in client systems and with leadership teams, has been taking a moment before you open your computer to think through, what do I really want to accomplish today or this week? It can be understanding your personality type and what gives you energy or sucks your energy, and helping to focus on what gives you energy throughout your day or your project. That can be setting up project check-ins, for example, at the beginning of the day versus at the end of the day, or doing pre-reads as opposed to talking about information together. So if folks have any ideas for their colleagues that have really worked for them that they want to share, this would be a great kind of sub thread to have in the background. Yes, thank you, Joe. That's the book. Brilliant. Yep, already seeing some time being booked in different ways that you can do that. Those are exactly the ways that you start to um, build the Thrive model and into your daily work. Oh, now, so I will stop looking at the chat, but I can see a couple of other really good ideas coming through as well, around basically creating agency, right, for yourself to be able to lead yourself first, and then leading others. So we've also done a lot of research around organizations specifically. So this brings it up a level. So if you think about how you might activate Thrive in yourself, this is then starting to think about how would you activate Thrive in an organization. What we've come up with since our last couple of books is it's really around adaptability. This is coming from John's original research around adaptive cultures in the 90s. We realized at some point last year that we couldn't continue to reference, at this point, 30-year-old research. So we went back to his original data set. We followed the same companies that he followed 30 years ago, saw where they are now. And essentially 30 years ago, he realized that through these hundreds of companies that they followed, they were able to break them into two sets: one that had adaptable cultures, others that had rigid cultures, and the rigid ones underperformed by 5 times, right? Or the adaptable cultures overperformed by 5 times in a variety of metrics. I was talking to someone from a large engineering organization earlier today, and we were talking about the importance of humanizing work, right? So this is 5 times from a financial perspective, but implicit in that is increased employee morale, engagement, well-being, all of the things that we know intrinsically are related to better business outcomes. When we reran this, instead of 5 times, it is now 8 times more important. Again, these are financial metrics, which get some people excited. For me personally, it's the kind of sub metrics underneath it around well-being and engagement that really starts to drive the excitement around how do you create an organization that can truly thrive. And I promised myself I would shut the chat off so I wasn't seeing all these great ideas. For us, what we've realized is there's 3 core components to creating an adaptable organization. One of them, John understood and touched on in the 90s, 2 of which are unique to now and to how we're thinking about leading through this moment of uncertainty. The first is, and I'll go through each of these in a little bit, the first is around change-friendly management approaches. So this is not just your typical top-down organizational structure, command and control. This is actually starting to create a different way of creating an environment in a system that can be change ready, right? So to that storm, is it coming? Is it going? If you have a adaptable organization or management approaches, you're able to quickly shift given the weather pattern. Second is what I talked about a second ago around adaptive cultures. So I'll go into it in a little bit more detail. And then the third is really related to some of the certifications that we've started to pull together around creating change capabilities in organizations at the individual level and then also at the group level. So from a management approaches perspective, similar to how originally we had been thinking in steps, we're now thinking in accelerators. There's a variety of myths that we've started to identify that are really holding organizations back, right? So I'll let you read that. I won't go through each of the 4 of them, but they are essentially around a command and control mindset. And they're essentially around some people being better, more trustworthy, and smarter than the larger organization out there, right? So these are implicit beliefs that we see in organizations that are holding them back from really moving forward fast. New lessons, for example, that we've identified. First is principle over policies. So the difference between having a set of policies that people need to follow to the T versus principles that they can then put into practice given the experience or given the moment in time where really they need to be thinking competent employees, right? So there's a sense of empowerment there. Number two is around decisions. So we really advocate and have seen the best decisions being made as close to work as possible. So this is very related also to lean and agile, which have been around for a while, but still yet haven't quite hit all organizations or even most organizations, mostly because it's around the behavioral change that is necessary for it and the letting go of control from folks who used to, for example, hold information. Third is around experimentation. So how do you create moments of experimentation and iteration in your organization? We run a variety of sprint projects in all sorts of capacities. For example, in a pharma company, a couple of weeks ago, we just did a 90-day readout. They were really struggling with their speed to market. They were able to have their speed to market time for early drug development based on taking an experimentation and an iterative approach. One of the things that's really interesting about working in pharma companies, especially in the R&D kind of capacity, is scientists are trained from an early age around failure and experimentation. Business, however, is trained usually at an early age to do the opposite. So it's about not failing, it's about succeeding. Startups aside. And so really what's really interesting is to find a way that you can bring out your innate, especially in a healthcare setting. How do you bring out your innate experimentation, right? We all know that an experiment by default needs to fail at some point, and that's where the learnings come in. Usually giving people the chance to learn is the hidden unlock in management approaches. The last one is the most critical for us right now in terms of this moment of uncertainty, and it's around not using the past to define the future. So it is around creating sustainable and clear scenario planning opportunities that aren't rooted necessarily in data and certainty. So there's a variety of really interesting approaches to scenario planning, and kind of futurescaping is sometimes how it's referred to, where you take an options-based approach, which actually highlights uncertainty as a positive thing because it gives you more opportunities to play with and experiment with, as opposed to being locked into the certainty of past data. Again, just kind of thinking about books that might be interesting. Black Swan is one of those. Tipping Points is another couple of books that touch on some of the specifics of how in organizations you would actually do this. So for us, this is the first key component to adaptable organizations, is change-friendly management approaches. So for anyone who has the opportunity to change any of these, amazing. For folks that can influence this, these could be some of the lists or some of the ideas that you can bring to your teams or to your colleagues to say, hey, I think for policies and procedures, for example, we rely really heavily on giving prescriptive advice as opposed to setting people up to take agency over how they, whether it's expense reports or events that they attend or how they use their time. We see this playing out a lot in quality, QA, pharmacovigilance, for example, anything where there's a compliance component to it, where actually if you help people step back and think about what they're trying to achieve, the principles and empowering people end up getting them closer to the results that they're really looking for. So this is management approaches. The second, this goes into some of the details that John came up with in his initial research that we've, again, revalidated around rigid cultures and adaptive cultures. So I'll let you take this in for a second. I'll ask the rhetorical question. Which side is your organization typically on? Are they typically on the rigid culture side, or are they typically on the adaptive culture side? For us, no matter how good the organization is, usually there's more rigidity than people would like to admit, especially around the bureaucratic and the risk aversion. Those are the ones that come out that we hear the most of. Maybe another just quick chat. comment. So for adaptive cultures, for example, of those focused on all stakeholders, trusted, taking risks, what would be most impactful, do you think, for your organization to start to inquire or be curious more about? If you look at this risk-taking, proactivity, openness to change and innovation, which of those might be most interesting for your organization to start exploring more? I see people already answered the rhetorical question there too. Okay, we'll hide your, we won't connect that back to your what you had said to us at the beginning. So this is the way that you can also really start conversations in your organization if you're finding that it is more rigid or less adaptive than you need to. Finding a place, instead of saying we are not adaptive, right? The framing around, wouldn't it be interesting if we explored how to be more proactive, right? So instead of setting a baseline past and saying, wouldn't it be interesting if we could think about or if we could explore? So it's, again, it's not putting people on the defensive, either your boss or yourself or your colleagues. It's more saying curiosity-based, thrive-based. How could I get more curious about what this could look like if we were a more risk-taking organization? The last is skills. And I want to ask one more. This is the last question for the chat. I've given you some sample options here, but truly think outside of the box, think whatever is most helpful for your organization. What do you believe is the most important skill for today's work environment? If you think about the job that you're doing now, what is the most critical skill that helps you be successful at work? These are some options from a survey that I'll show you the results from in a second. Number two, okay. Well, there's a reason we're all in this webinar. That's good. Systems thinking is terrific. Four, you're making me do some work. Yeah, so a lot of systems thinking, a lot of flexibility and agility. If I was a curiosity, love that. People focused. So this is definitely a biased sample, which is terrific. Again, there's a reason we're here. For us, what we've been continuing to help organizations see is that the soft stuff is no longer a nice to have. It's actually what's going to drive business impact and personal impact into the future. And it's not just us saying it. This is from a WEF, a World Economic Forum survey for 2025. The top three, two of them are exactly what you had just mentioned. So resilience, flexibility, and agility, and leadership and social influence. So if you think about the flexibility and agility around management systems, so that's how you would start to embed that in a larger organizational context. And then from a leadership and social influence, first you need to lead self. So leading self, leading team, leading an organization. You would need to understand what puts me into survive, what puts me into thrive. How do I then take stock of that and start to reduce the noise in the system and start to lead others in a way that can get them more proactively into the influence of a networked approach, whether that's a network like this, whether it's a network in your actual organization. These are the places where we really see impact happening. And I also talent management and support succession, absolutely. So again, this is another list that I won't go through, but we'll send all of this research afterwards. The change leadership skills that we've identified in the work that we've done in creating our certifications and in the research around what makes people as adaptable as possible is these first seven. And the connections I'll make are, first, a compelling vision. So Joe, I think this goes back perfectly to the storytelling that you're going to be doing soon, right? Being able to tell your hero journey, how you see yourself in the world, how you can help other people see themselves in your story, and vice versa, starts to create the empathy and the connection between all of the hard work that will have to happen afterwards. So change would happen more often if it were easy. right? So you need to find a way to create these stories that really helps people engage and understand how they can connect. The other bit I'll point out is 4 and 5. So head and heart, and then barriers to change, just because you're going to touch on neuroscience in a couple of your other courses as well, or webinars. So head and heart for us, again, John is an engineer by training, and leadership was a unknown quantity initially. Mainly it was all through management in kind of early days. That was a very head specific and control and planned way of leading through change and leading projects. We've now realized that it is just as much, if not more, about heart than it is about head. So how do you then create as a leader that kind of heart connection, which goes back to storytelling, goes back to creating empathy, both within actual peer-to-peer relationships and within the organization. The barriers to change I also highlight because it is where most change most change projects go wrong, is they focus on the barriers as opposed to just recognizing the barriers. So ideally, what you want to do is not start with the naysayers. You want to not start with the barriers. You want to recognize them, acknowledge them, but you want to start with places where you can actually make progress. So you want to start with the folks that are engaged and excited. You want to start with the quick win that you can make in a couple of months to demonstrate that change is possible. Because one of the things that I'm sure all of us have learned is it's very easy to say no. It's very hard to get someone to switch from a no to a yes. But it's easier to get someone who's already in a yes mode or excited about something to make a case for why change is possible. And it's even easier then to convince people in the middle of that change curve who are on the fence to come over and join the transformation and create more momentum, right? So again, many organizational change efforts start with the loudest voices and the naysayers, as opposed to just recognizing them and really focusing on where the energy is. So if we think about really building these change capabilities in a full organization, whether that's hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or 1.5 million, this then allows you to do 3 things. First, spot new opportunities and challenges. So you'll be able to be more responsive. If you think back to the adaptable cultures, you basically have thousands of people around the organization that can see where and how we can start to make an impact, even if small. Secondly, folks are activated. So people are empowered to take action. I remember a project several years ago in the Veterans Affairs where the medical director was down in the basement, unclear why he was wandering around the basement, but he was kind of checking things out, trying to figure out kind of what was happening on the ground floor, so to speak. And he saw a janitor changing a sign. The janitor did not recognize that this was the medical director. He asked the janitor what he was doing, why he was doing it, and if he had permission to do it. And the answer was, I actually don't have permission to do it, but I've gotten so many complaints from patients that they get lost down here that I'm putting up my own sign so that they can understand how to get back to the stairwell or the elevator because they mistakenly found their way down here. This to him was, a terrific opportunity to say, this is the type of behavior we're looking for. This is the activation that we're looking for in the organization. The next missing step is then, please go talk to QA or please go talk to facilities so that we can get that updated kind of more formally, right? But it's the action from the ground that really makes the impact. And lastly is the persistence. So this goes a lot back to how we lead as individuals, if we're people leaders or leading teams. It's helping people understand that change is not easy. Uncertainty is not easy. And if we can understand ourselves more, if we have a story that shows ourselves as going through those trials and tribulations, but comes out at the end stronger, wiser, and successful, that's what builds that persistence. And if I go back to where I started with more leadership from more people, this is exactly what John kind of stumbled across in the early 70s. How do we create organizations where there's more leadership from more people? For us, it's 3 core components. It's adaptable and flexible change-friendly management approaches, It's the adaptable cultures and having the skills and the competencies to actually put it into action. That's what I want to leave you with. I have not been monitoring chat, so I don't know if there's questions quite yet. Again, we'll send this afterwards. This was ideally a whistle-stop tour of some of the thinking that we're doing now.
Fantastic, thank you, Nick. Really valuable insights, and particularly at this point in time where, as you say, and as the graph certainly shows, there is so much uncertainty, and it seems to be having a compound factor. There doesn't seem to be a point where it sort of goes back to a baseline anymore. It just seems to keep growing. So who's got questions for Nick that they would like to call out? Stick your hands up, because it'd be lovely to hear from you and get your thoughts and insights as well as specific questions for Nick. I've put a couple of questions in the chat. You've all been a bit hesitant about asking questions, although you've made loads of great comments in the chat. But I'm going to start with my questions, but do get your questions out there as well, or stick your hand up. This is a fantastic opportunity to learn more about this valuable topic. So Nick, a question for you about the sort of thrive and survive element. Mm-hmm. How do you maintain the thrive approach when leaders and managers around you are reacting in a survive mode?
Yes, get that question a lot for sure. There's two answers that we usually give. One is try to impact the system. The other is try to protect yourself, right? So what can you then help those managers or leaders around you recognize in terms of the impact that they're having? Most often than not, when someone is in survive, they don't actually recognize the impact that they're having on others. So that's the first bit, is truly taking a moment, excuse me, if you have that type of relationship, to pause and say, when you phrase a question, when you phrase a statement with a, I don't understand, what I hear or what I think others hear is you're telling them that either you're smarter or you're kind of undermining the work that we've been doing, whatever that kind of turn of phrase is that people would start with, right? Helping them understand what that impact can be really, really powerful. We work with a lot of leaders where we help them ask more questions as opposed to giving statements or answers. So leaders who are in survive often are in black and white thinking, yes, no, binary. So if you can help them create some gray in what they say, it actually provides an opportunity for people to explore and speak more. That's the best case that you're able to influence, right, other people's behavior. If you're not, for me, this goes really key to taking stock. The first thing in understanding yourself in terms of what puts you into survive or thrive. So if it's a boss, for example, with whom you have had a tenuous working relationship, right? I often help people say, what's another story you could tell yourself about your relationship? What else might be true? Can you create another story, right, that you can understand might be true, even if you know it's not, even if you think it might be true, opens a door in your mind to not be as triggered when they come at you with XYZ request or comment. Those would be my first two main reactions of try to influence and definitely try to create different stories for yourself to not be so reactive.
I think that's a really great point. It's very easy to perhaps have a knee-jerk reaction to responses based on our own views of things and our own experiences and potentially traumas from the past. And I think that thing about, well, what does it look like? You know, what alternative perspectives could there be, and what's the viewpoint from them look like? I had some experiences like that myself, and part of it was how do we change that relationship and that dynamic? And you know, sometimes it's about understanding their perspective and their point of view and trying to bring that out as well, so that it becomes a bit more balanced. I think that's very important. So the other question that sort of I had was around how do we influence the command and control hierarchy, which has a very sort of, it's very risk averse in healthcare, for very good reasons, because, you know, patients die if things aren't done safely. But also that decision-making bit to enable that bit about decisions are best closest to the work, because I recognize that. because they know, people closest to the work know more about it and can be more flexible. How do we do that in a risk-averse, fairly hierarchical sector?
I think it's a great question. For what it's worth, we've done this and kind of interviewed leaders in energy and nuclear contexts. So it's equally, I think, regulated and high impact, let's say, if something goes wrong. And what we always find is organizations will default to the lowest level of risk and apply that across the board. And that's the starting point problem, right? Because yes, a patient could die or have an adverse effect or XYZ thing could happen, right? From a patient perspective, but I doubt that sign change that janitor was doing is going to impact that type of patient outcome, right? So it is helping the organizations and leaders understand that over here with patients, zero risk tolerance. Here in a business context, there's places where we can actually accept a lot of risk, create the iterations, the experimentation around policies, procedures, how we work with each other, where failure is actually celebrated. The kind of Amy Edmondson's work in is a spectacular case of this. That psychological safety actually came out of the healthcare industry. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that being open to saying I was wrong and having that feeling of safety is what moves us forward and actually gets us better patient outcomes. Now, that's great for us all to say on this call. It is hard still to convince someone who doesn't see it that way that they should give it a chance. And for me, that goes back to instead of trying to change someone who's already saying no, recognize those barriers. Where could you start? Where could you demonstrate that taking a risk can have a positive impact, even if it's as small as changing a sign, right? Even if it's as small as, in a process, I touched this paper 5 times. Is there a way I could touch it 4 times, right? Be a little more efficient or effective. So that people can get a sense of, oh, change is possible. This is something actually that I picked up from a couple of psychologists at one of the VA hospitals we were working at. They did a lot of work with addiction. We were working a lot with kind of PSD patients. And she had said, creating a story where someone can see how something else might be true starts to open their mind to being more flexible. So it is not about saying, yes, that is a fact. It's about saying, could this be possible? And so if you're kind of proving with those naysayers and those command and control leaders, could this be possible to make this more efficient? What if I gave this a shot for 2-3 weeks and demonstrate that something might change? That's what we would suggest.
I think that's really important, and getting those different lenses on it. I think, and this might be slightly controversial for some folks, but also not asking for permission. Unless it's going to systemically impact massive changes and, requires sort of approvals and stuff, then I think not asking for approval is a great way to test things out and see how they work using a framework that obviously ensures safety. We've got a hand up. We've got a few questions in the chat now. People are coming to ask questions. So I'll just go to the one in the chat and then we'll go to the ones that people have mentioned in the chat and come back to those. So Maria, do you want to ask your question? Oh, you're on mute, Maria.
Sorry, that was probably my best part. So no, I was really interested to hear your kind of when you were talking to moving towards leading kind of a leadership from principles as opposed to using policies and in creating that flexibility. And I guess I work within health and social care, mainly social work, and a lot of the work we do is reliant on policies, and that's the kind of accountability and all the rest of it. But I completely get how that deactivates the passion and the vision and that. So I'm wondering what kind of messages could we use when we're training leaders and leadership to find the balance between still being accountable to policies, but actually finding the principles that drives what we do and why we do it?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, it goes to one level above it, which is what do you need from people, or what do you want from people? Do you want them to follow a policy? And then if that truly is, if you do some reflection on it, if that truly is what you want, then a policy might be the right answer. If what you actually want is for them to be able to think critically in potentially changing environments, then we would say principles is the way to go, right? Because what you don't want is for them to have a situation that is not in the handbook and then freeze and not know what to do, right? You want to give them the scaffolding for them to be able to react in a way that it might not be the best decision to make, but it's at least a clear and informed decision, right? So I think it would go back, Joe, a bit to the question you had around risk too. So there's places, where you probably don't want to take any risk. Policy, procedure, that's important. There's places where actually you want people to be creative and to find the best policy that we might implement or might kind of redefine in 5 years. And so for a couple of years, you have principles, right? And I think messaging wise, messaging it as not a yes or a no, or this or that, but both in the right instance is the most important. So
Okay,
higher order, what do I need from someone? Do I need them to follow the rules, or do I need them to think critically?
Yeah, and we need them to do both, but I'll work on that one.
That's great.
There's no easy
Thanks
answer.
very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Probably got time for one last question. I'm going to go for the one that's going to have the most thumbs up for it. So, how do we manage and lead change that is occurring so quickly and erratically that the last change hasn't embedded when the next one comes along? And that's from Joe Lennox.
And it sounds like many other people as well.
Yes.
So we are now looking at change from a continuous perspective as opposed to an episodic perspective. So previously in change management, we would say, start your project, create your Gantt chart. Here's where we all celebrate success, and maybe there's a couple of learnings, and then we have a year of business as usual, right? I think what you're saying is the clear, there is no more business as usual. We are in a constant state of transformation. So for us, this is a bit of it's not about steps, it's about accelerators. And it's not about hard start and end dates. It's around constant transitions. So there's another model around transitions that's terrific to look into, which is Bridges' model. Again, older, but still really relevant around we are constantly in endings, liminal kind of middle ground where things are being defined, and new beginnings. So how do you keep that fluid? And I would say literally in project meetings, as opposed to saying our end date is in August 1st, right? It's actually the next milestone is August 1st, right? So it's even the language that we use is not as black and white. It's more around continuity.
And I think that's something that people will resonate with, because there is a big mission around continuous improvement within healthcare. I don't think it always works effectively and well. So there's maybe something about bringing some of these thoughts and techniques and principles into that to help to achieve some of that and move it forward. I'm not dissing the improvement methods at all, but it's just people's use of it. Can we squeeze in one last question?
Can I just add one more thing on that, which is to make sure we're not sprinting a marathon, right? To that point. So there is a high risk of burnout and kind of a variety of other negative consequences if we think we can have continuous change at the same rate. So there is how do you give people a break mentally as well as actually?
Yes, absolutely. And how do we build that into the rhythm of the improvements that we're managing? Absolutely, that's really, really valuable point. We've only got 1 minute left. Just Nick, where do people take this next? What can they do in terms of finding out more about the research that Kotter's done, and also, what would be useful for people to work on to take this forward?
So depending on what resonated for you, again, that was kind of a splattering from some of our courses. So you can check out the courses. We'll send a few links around. Connect with us. we are always open to conversations. We've actually done a host of different webinars in other parts of the NHS and done a lot of work in the healthcare sector. So we're always happy to either be a sounding board for ideas or to connect you with other people that might be interesting conversations. Again, John is an academic at heart, so our hope is to get our ideas out to the world, to the people that need them most. And if you think you're those people, then don't hesitate to reach out.
And Helen's put the link to your LinkedIn in the chat so people can connect with you directly. I've put a link to the website in as well. But also what we'll do is if there's any specific links and research, we will send them out along with the link to the recording from today's session. And those links can then go to people who maybe didn't have the opportunity to come along today. Right, we've run out of time and we got through most of the questions, but it's been absolutely fascinating and so timely. Thank you so much, Nick, for your time today and for sharing those fantastic insights.